Not all fat is created equal. There's a huge difference between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. Subcutaneous fat is that fat you can pinch. It's right below the skin, and it's actually part of human evolution to help protect us. Visceral fat, on the other hand, goes inside our core and surrounds all of our essential organs like our liver, our pancreas, and our kidneys. Not only does this fat get in the way of everything, it creates inflammation all over our body and puts us under massive stress. So how is this visceral fat created? Say you eat a sandwich. The carbs or the glucose from that bread are gonna go to a couple different places in our body. First, it's gonna go to our brain. This amazing computer we have takes 20% of all of our energy demands. It's also gonna go into our cells to be used immediately in our muscles for energy. And finally, it might even go to our liver to be stored for some of that near-term release when our muscles or brain need it, but not right now. But the next place it's gonna go is it's gonna go into our fat. And this is stored for longer periods of time that we don't use the energy until we really need it in the future. Now, to be clear, it's absolutely okay to have fat. In fact, humans required it to survive. We needed this storage for the cold winter or for when the times when food was scarce. Our body is designed to balance energy in and energy out and manage those peaks and valleys with food. It's actually amazing if you think about it. It's like wearing a camelback and being able to drink water whenever we need it. Fat is literally a battery with stored energy right on our body. But again, this type of fat is subcutaneous fat, and each of us has a finite storage amount of this subcutaneous fat. Now, it's mostly genetic, but some people just happen to have the equivalent of, say, a 10 by 10 storage unit that can barely fit the stuff from your studio apartment when you were 22. Others of us have a 30 by 30 space that fits a couple of cars. But whatever the size of the storage unit you have gets filled up, then the glucose needs to go somewhere else. And that's when it becomes visceral fat. This is the problem. This is the fat around our waist, impacting essential organs and giving us metabolic dysfunction. Maybe an even better analogy is a parking lot. So think about if a parking lot gets full and so many cars are backed up onto the street, it blocks all the traffic, causing a ton of accidents and problems. It's also why there's such a thing as skinny fat. A little pouch in your stomach, or some people with a massive beer belly, without extra weight in, say, their chest or their legs, they still have metabolic problems. They just don't have a lot of storage for that subcutaneous fat. You don't necessarily need to be obese to have metabolic problems. It really comes down to what that storage unit of subcutaneous fat is, and then how much visceral fat we have on our body. So what's the easiest way to measure your visceral fat? Now, there are some real easy ways to get an approximate measure of this type of fat. But first, a word of caution. Don't look at BMI. This measure doesn't account for bone density or muscle mass and cannot differentiate the different types of fat when it's trying to tell you a measure of obesity. Instead, measure your waist circumference. Men should aim to have a waist no greater than 38 inches, and women should be less than 32 inches. That's regardless of how tall you are. But if you do want to take into account your height, your waist to height ratio, the number of inches of your waist divided by the number of inches you are tall, should always be less than 0.5. Now, if that's not enough and you want to get more specific to really identify the visceral fat, there are so many clinics out there now that offer DEXA scans. And this is where you can really get a full picture of the different types of fat inside of your body. There's even a lot more technology coming out with scales that you can use at home to understand what is your subcutaneous fat versus your visceral fat, so you can really identify that risk before it becomes a massive problem. Why is visceral fat becoming such a massive problem today? Well, number one, there's no more cold winter. We live in a world of abundance. There's food all the time, and most of the food we eat is full of glucose, aka sugar. So we're overloading our energy intake. Another problem is fructose. This sweet molecule is now in so much of our food. Think about juices and soda and anything where you see high fructose corn syrup. And it doesn't convert energy as efficiently as glucose does. And it's especially evil because it makes us think we're still hungry. So we eat more and more and more. Number three, we simply aren't as active as we used to be. The average steps have declined from over 16,000 to less than 4,000 today for the average person. We're not foraging for food, we're using DoorDash. We're not using our hands to do chores, we have a riding mower or a leaf blower. And that's even if we take care of our yard ourselves. So how do we get rid or prevent this visceral fat? Well, you can see this picture. Imagine you have this huge supply of sugar coming in all the time. Maybe even it's a nonstop faucet. And when it's done filling up our brain and our muscles, it goes to our subcutaneous fat. But if that gets full, that overflows into our visceral fat. So what can we do? Well, first, we have to have a smaller pitcher of sugar. We got to start with less coming in We have to eat more real food and less processed crap so that we don't have that overflow coming in all the time. And another quick win is too, if you see the word fructose anywhere on that ingredient list, put the item back on the shelf and don't eat it. Second, we simply have to move more and lift more weights. The more energy we pull into our muscles, the more that our subcutaneous fat won't get overflowing and we won't have a buildup of visceral fat. One way to get more active, try this 2-minute challenge. Get up every hour you're awake and move for 2 minutes. No, this doesn't substitute for trying to get 10,000 steps or doing a HIIT workout or going to the gym, but imagine how good you'll feel and the calories you can burn if 12 to 14 times a day, you just do some quick squats, push-ups, or even a short walk, anything, but just for 2 minutes every hour. And as a bonus here, the more strength and muscle mass, the more you increase your storage capacity to use that energy, you support your muscle, and it doesn't become visceral fat. Lastly, there's even evidence that shows stress, and specifically cortisol, converts subcutaneous fat into visceral fat. So manage your stress. Yes, that can include daily meditation or breath work, but just as important is take that pause when you feel that trigger of stress coming out. The more you can get your nervous system out of fight or flight mode, the more you're going to be able to have a better metabolic health. If you really want to go deeper on visceral fat and metabolic health, here are some great books and resources you should check out. First, Dr. Peter Attia's book Outlive is absolutely the Bible when it comes to preventative health and longevity. It gets deep into the science of how our subcutaneous fat turns into visceral fat and some of the ways in which we can live better in this world of abundance. The next book I'd recommend is Dr. David Perlmutter and his book Drop Acid. It talks all about the evils of fructose and how we can use measures like uric acid and other biomarkers to really dig in how we can prevent visceral fat and stay healthy longer. There's also a great book from Dr. Gabrielle Lyon called Forever Strong. How do we use muscle to combat this fat that's happened and obesity that's affecting all of us right now? And there's a new book I'm excited to get in May from Dr. Casey Means called Good Energy. Dr. Means is one of the experts at Levels Health, and she has become an absolute rock star when it comes to managing her metabolic health. So those are some great reads if you want to go beyond what we talked about here today for visceral fat and metabolic health.